cough drop, a Hall's sugar-free blackberry cough drop. And the reason I put it in there is to keep my throat lubricated for a talk. Something about the sea air that's so invigorating, but it makes my throat scratchy. So this helps and keeps me from doing a lot of during the talk. So you'll appreciate that. But this started years ago, and the reason I show you the lifesaver, the cough drop, when Bonnie and I were first married and first in ministry, we did a lot of traveling preaching. And the denomination that we were serving at the time, a lot of the old folks said, "Brother, don't worry about the clock, don't worry about your wristwatch, just preach on." Well, 20 minutes or so is enough for a sermon. And by the way, we're going to have an interdenominational worship service Sunday morning at 9 o'clock right in here. Susan has asked me if I would lead the service. But they said, don't pay attention to the clock, don't watch your watch. And after a while, it gets kind of tiresome, and your old derriere begins to resist. And so I found some wintergreen lifesavers and would pop them in there. Not lifesavers, but mints. And it would dissolve in about 18 to 20 minutes, and that's, as I said, long enough for a sermon. And one Sunday morning, I'm preaching and preaching and preaching, and I'm thinking, is this thing never going to dissolve? I'm wearing myself out, as well as the good folks out there. And I discreetly coughed into my hand, and I looked, and it was a button, not a mint. True story, Cub Scouts honor. So I want you to see that it is a thing that will dissolve, and it'll dissolve in about 45 minutes, and that's the time that Nikki has given us to be here together. So let's get started. The Bermuda Triangle, you see the map of it here, and we're going to be sailing into it and spending some time here. And what I'm talking to you today about is the legend of the Bermuda Triangle and Flight 19, which is the linchpin of the whole thing. And what I want to do is present the legend, put that in quotation marks, of the Bermuda Triangle. People who talk about UFOs and Atlantis and black holes and all of this stuff, and there's something going on, and it's mysterious, and I'm not a believer. If you are, we'll agree to disagree, and we'll have some fun with our disagreement. And as we go along, I'm going to be telling you some of the stories that come from there and offering a natural explanation, something that might have happened otherwise than a UFO appearing and carrying the ship or the plane away. So we begin, and I want to read something to you. And I promise this is the only thing that I'll read to you. It's from the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. And it talks about this aircraft, a particular flight that left out of San Juan, Puerto Rico, a few days after Christmas in 1948. And here we go. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle goes something like this. The night was ablaze with stars as the DC-3 began its descent toward Miami. In the cabin, the passengers on their way home after a Christmas vacation sang "We Three Kings." As the stewardess, you know how long it was a stewardess, served cookies and punch. In the cockpit, the captain reached for his microphone. Miami Tower, this is Airborne Transport, November 16002. Over. Airborne Transport, November 16002. This is Miami Tower. Go ahead. November 16002 is approaching Miami from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Am now 50 miles south. All is well. Have the city in sight. Landing instructions, please. Over. 002, continue your approach. Advise when you're at the airport in flight. 002, this is Miami Tower. Do you read? Over. Miami Tower to 002. Do you copy? Over. Airborne Transport, November 16002. This is Miami Tower. Do you read? Do you read? Please acknowledge. Over. But November 16002 never acknowledged the call from Miami Tower on that early December morning, December 30th, 1948. Nor did it answer repeated calls from New Orleans and San Juan, and from the Coast Guard. The weather was ideal, the water clear and calm and so shallow that in some places you could see large objects on the ocean floor. But the sea guards her secrets well. No trace of the DC-3 has ever been found. The menace that haunts the Bermuda Triangle had struck again, claiming yet another victim, vanishing as many had, without reason, in good weather, without sending a cry of distress, and without leaving a trace. On the afternoon of December 5th, 1945, 5 Navy Avenger torpedo bombers took off on a short routine patrol and disappeared. A rescue plane immediately headed for the lost patrol, and it too vanished. The Navy, after a lengthy investigation, admitted that it was more confused after the inquest than before they had begun. One Navy officer commented that they vanished as completely as if they'd flown to Mars. And that's the way the legend of the Bermuda Triangle begins. But what is going on out there? Let's begin with a ship called the Mary Celeste that was found abandoned at sea December of 1872, going back a long way now. And she started life as the Amazon, no relation to the online company that I send lots of my money to and help their space program out. But she was rechristened the Mary Celeste in 1861 and was found adrift in the Azores, thousands of miles away from the Bermuda Triangle. And how this ever gets into the legend is beyond me, but this is always one of the stories that leads any account of the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. The ship is abandoned, it's adrift, and another ship called the De Grazia appears on the scene and finds it so. And here's a woodcut that's contemporary of the Mary Celeste. Some say a meal was cooking on the stove. Looked like it was ready just to be served as soon as you would be at the table. Others say the ship was ready for an admiralty inspection. White glove, no dust, no dirt anywhere. Others say that the decks were covered with blood, evidence of a massacre that had taken place. Some say that Captain Morehouse of the rescue ship De Grazia and his crew were pirates, that they took the supply of the cargo, which was alcohol, and killed everybody on board and stole the alcohol. Others say that both Captain Morehouse of the De Grazia and Captain Briggs of the Mary Celeste were in cahoots. They were guilty of the crime of barratry, which is a high seas caper of 2 ships getting together. We'll steal everything off of this one, we'll hide it on this one, and we'll mysteriously find this one afloat and adrift, and we'll split the profits, some say. Here's the captain, Captain Benjamin, his wife Sarah, their daughter Sophia. They were among the folks on board and were never seen again. The lifeboat was gone. It had not been ripped off of the moorings. It had been lowered into the water. And a newspaper article from the Boston Post, February 24th of the next year, says that there was this cargo of alcohol, and the crew consisted mostly of foreigners. Now that's journalistic ease in this time period for false news, or for whoever you're opposed to, whatever your prejudice is at the moment, that this crew of foreigners got drunk and killed everybody, and that's the newspaper's explanation for it. There was one man who claimed to be a survivor, and he told the most amazing tale of a race, a swimming match between Captain Morehouse and his first mate. The story goes that the first mate challenged the captain to a swimming match around the ship, several laps, and the captain, being a great swimmer and not one to have his honor besmirched, said, well, okay, let's get swimming. And it was one of those things you see in cartoons. Everybody runs to this side, and the thing tips to this side. They run around, the ship's tipping from side to side. And as they're completing the last lap of the race, a shark appears, eats the captain, eats the first mate, and everybody's looking over the side in amazement when a rogue wave comes from the other side, tips the ship over, throws everybody in the water. The shark calls his buddies, and they have a feast. And this one survivor lived to tell the story. Well, you believe that. There's swampland in Florida I want to sell you, and a bridge in London. Simple explanation is probably there was a storm. They lowered the lifeboat and were lost at sea. But it's a good tale. And in fact, Arthur Conan Doyle picked up the story. And before he wrote about the world's first consulting detective living at 221B Baker Street, he wrote a novel called The Strange Tale of the Maria Celeste. Changed the name from Mary to Maria. And it was made into a movie a number of years ago that starred Bela Lugosi. And most of what the legend of the Bermuda Triangle reports today about this story comes from Conan Doyle's book, a novel that was written after the fact. Well, there's a couple of more famous episodes. One is a ship called the Cyclops that disappeared in March of 1918. Here she is. She sailed from Barbados, loaded with a crew of with a cargo of magnesium ore, 300 crew, 20,000 tons of magnesium ore in perfectly clear weather the whole way. And leading magazine of the day, Literary Digest, said that a creature from the sea came up and grabbed it and pulled it down below the sea and was never seen again. And that's obviously not the Cyclops. I couldn't find a picture of a sea creature getting the Cyclops, so we substitute this one. President Woodrow Wilson said, and he's right, only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship. But remember, the legend says the weather was perfect. There was no reason for the ship to be lost because of the weather. Well, this ship, and the next two I'll show you, have this high superstructure that's part of the cargo loading mechanism. And if this cargo of manganese ore would happen to shift during rolling on storm-tossed seas, you can see how it might affect the thing. And if it gets too far over, the weight of those devices would cause the ship not to be able to right itself. But it was good weather all the way, right? No, it wasn't. This weather map from 1918 was found a few years ago, and it's contemporary to the travel of the Cyclops in March of 1918 from Barbados. And this line, this yellow line here, is the path of a storm that occurred along the coast at the time that the Cyclops would have been in the area. And it's hard for you to see it, but this red spot is the greatest intensity of the storm off the coast of North Carolina and just south of Norfolk, Virginia, where the ship was headed. So this storm is gone, it's forgotten, it's over, and then the ship is reported lost some weeks later, and it's never connected with the two. Probably this is the explanation. It sure is a better one than that sea monster grabbing it and pulling it down. December 1942, November 1941. Keep that date in mind. Two ships, the Proteus and Nereus, very much like the Cyclops, same origination point, same destination, same cargo, were lost at sea. And the legend says there was not German U-boat activity in the area. They were not sunk by German submarines. 1941, November, December. However, German war records reveal that 2 days after launch, the first of the vessels was torpedoed, and they chased the second vessel for about a week and then torpedoed and sunk her. So in spite of what the legend says, German submarines in the area did torpedo them and sink both of them. The legend's getting kind of weak, I think. Now, the story that we began with, the December 48 flight of the DC-3 from San Juan to Miami, Captain Robert Lundquist was the pilot of the ship. He was an experienced captain. He had hundreds of hours of flight time. And as he's flying to San Juan on the first leg of the voyage, he radios the tower and says, "I've got a warning light. You need to check it out once I get here." They found out that it was an indicator light for the batteries as connected to the brakes. I'm not a mechanic. I don't understand any more than that. But that was the problem. And they found out that the battery was needed recharging. So they did what they needed to do to get it cooking again, water in and whatever it takes. Rehooked it back up and said, "Captain, it's going to take 6 to 8 hours to get it charged. You need to wait until then before you take off." He said, "No, I've got a schedule to keep. Tell you what I'll do. I'll take off and I'll circle San Juan Tower until the batteries are charged sufficiently to go. And that working of the system will make the battery charge faster." They agreed to that, but strangely enough, the radio wasn't working properly. The plane could not hear the tower could not hear the plane, and to communicate, they had to send a jeep back and forth. Well, Lundquist takes off, and when he takes off, the wind is blowing from the northwest, and that's the last weather report he gets. He does not hear that the wind will change on the flight. And that conversation that I read to you is mostly made up. Miami has no record of that transmission at their station. The New Orleans station did hear it and sent it to the Coast Guard. But the part about him being 50 miles south of the city and could see the lights, that's not in the official transcript of the report. Letter B is where they should have been if they're on course, as Lundquist has stated it. Remember, the wind when he took off was blowing from the northwest. Now, you pilots know that if the wind, or northwest, if the wind is blowing from the northwest, you're going to fly into it, so it will move you over to your course. You'll use less fuel. It'll be an easier flight than if you fly into the wind and it pushes you back and you have to fight that on your flight. But the wind has changed, and it's now from the northeast. And so chances are at that moment he was at point A, just about to fly out into the Gulf of Mexico. Some of the spots are shallow, but there are places along there that's up to 5 miles deep. So the plane could have gone down there and no one would ever have known it. And if it flies out into the Gulf of Mexico, the radio's not working, it runs out of fuel, it can well be lost out there and never be seen again. And that is indeed what happened in this tragic story. Now, lots of folks give lots of theories, and you can spend lots of time reading lots of books. And believe me, they're out there on all of this stuff. You'll find book after book of scholarly work on time warps. Steven Spielberg used this one to find the lost flight. If you've seen the movie CE-3K, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, you know that they found the flight in the New Mexico desert someplace. The coffee was still warm. Excuse me. Cough drop's still there. The coffee was still warm in the thermos bottles. The fuel in the tanks was still topped up, like barely the engines had been started. But Spielberg only got 2 of the 5 plane identifications right. He certainly could have done better research than that. But time warps and reverse gravity fields and atmospheric aberrations and magnetic and gravitational anomalies, death rays from Atlantis. We'll come back to this one. Black holes. I've never figured this out. How could a black hole concentrate on one ship or one airplane and not suck the whole planet into it? But that's a theory. Underwater signaling devices to guide invaders from other planets causes the navigational system of planes and ships to malfunction. I like this one. UFOs collecting Earthlings in their vehicles for study in other galaxies, an intergalactic zoo, and we need to get some Earthlings to populate the zoo. A recent theory that has a little merit to it is methane gas. When plant life and animal life decomposes underwater, it produces methane, and the methane gas can make bubbles, and it can come up. And if it's a large enough bubble that appears under a ship, it will break the surface tension of the water and could cause the ship to capsize in that anomaly. But there has to be a lot of gas to account for all of the stories of all of the ships in the Bermuda Triangle. And there's one more that really is my all-time favorite of the list. And to tell you what it is, I'm going to turn to the chairman of the board, Old Blue Eyes, Frank Sinatra, to tell you.
Such an ancient pitch, but one that I'd never switch. There ain't no nicer witch than you, than you. Oh, you're a lovely witch.
Witchcraft. Well, UFOs do get a mention, and folks, we've got to talk about this, because when I was a boy, there was a study called Project Blue Book, and you remember, if you're as old as I am, all the grainy photographs of UFOs, and the Air Force investigated it, and there were lots and lots of pictures. It was hard to turn around without bumping into a photograph of a UFO. And today we carry cameras disguised as cell phones, and there's not a picture of a UFO to be found. I guess the pilots of the UFOs have figured it out, and they don't want to be caught, so they don't come here anymore. Atlantis gets a notion, as I mentioned, as I told you. All the power that was in that famous, mythical, mysterious, missing continent is still at work, and it sends out beams and captures ships and so forth. It got its biggest play back in the 60s by this man, Edgar Casey, who was touted as a prophet. And Casey said that Atlantis would reappear in 1968 or 1969. This is the only Atlantis I know that's reappeared. I don't know if that's what Casey was talking about or not, but that's all that I know that's popped up. Well, let's get to the linchpin, and in the last 10 or 12 minutes of our time together, let's talk about Flight 19. 5 Navy torpedo bombers, Avenger torpedo bombers, who took off at 2:10 p.m. on December 5th, 1945, on a routine training flight, and were never heard from again. And it gives, as I said, the linchpin to the legend of the Bermuda Triangle. A man by the name of Geddes wrote this article in the Argosy magazine of 1950, and that's where the name comes from. And you've seen the map that I gave you, Bermuda and Puerto Rico, and Miami gets the other point because it was Gaddis's hometown. But here's the flight. Here's the crew, the captain, Charles Taylor, and his crew, the lieutenant, and his crew in front of his aircraft. This was April or May before the flight took off in December. Here's Lieutenant Charles Taylor of Foxterre 28. FT the call was Foxterre 28, the lead plane. Ensign Joseph T. Bossi, Foxterre 3. Captain Edward J. Powers Jr., Foxterre 36. Second Lieutenant Forrest Gerber, Foxterre 81. and Captain Bill Stivers, Foxterre 117. We'll come back to Captain Stivers in a few minutes. Another player in the drama is Lieutenant Robert Cox in Foxterre 74. He was not part of the flight, but he was another flight instructor. He was in the air at the time, and he does talk to Taylor frequently during the time that the flight is up and that folks are looking for the flight. Here's the air station, Fort Lauderdale Naval Air Station, that they took off from. And one of the major players in this drama is the weather. When they took off, the weather was marginal. It was okay, but it's deteriorating. But there's enough time, if you fly the training route properly, to be back safely. One of the first people to testify in the Navy's inquiry was a weather officer who said it went from bad to worse. A British ship in the area. The captain also testified and said it was extremely rough seas, difficult to navigate through at the time that the planes went missing. Now, here's the route that they flew, and this white triangle is difficult for you to see, but it's the only one I can find that shows these spots. They were to fly out to Hen and Chicken Shoals and do practice bombing. Then fly a certain distance, turn north, and then turn back to the station. Here's the actual flight map. This is Exhibit 1 in the Navy's inquiry, showing you the flight that they were to have practiced and completed. Flight 18 went out about a half hour, started about a half hour before Flight 19, flew the exact same route and came back with no difficulties. The radio frequency that they were operating on was 4805 kilocycles. It's also a public broadcasting signal. There was a major public station in Havana, Cuba that was playing news and music at the same time. There's some overlap between the planes and the ground and the radio stations. At one point they tell Taylor to switch to 3,000 kilocycles, which is the emergency frequency. But he said, I'm afraid I will lose my flight, will stay on this frequency. And there are records of conversation. At 1600 hours, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Taylor says, I don't know where we are. We must have gotten lost after that last turn, which was probably at the top point of the triangle. 30 minutes later, 1630 hours, 4:30, he says, and he's talking to Lieutenant Cox, I know where I am now. I'm at 2,300 feet. Don't come after me. Now you see, here is a flight leader. He's not lost. He's exploring new territory. But he doesn't want the embarrassment of having been found by another flight leader and being led back in, the little lost sheep coming home. He figures out where he is. He tells Cox, I know where I am now. Don't come after me. When this is retold in the legend of the Bermuda Triangle, what Lieutenant Taylor will say is, don't come after me! There's bug-eyed monsters. There's alien spacecraft. Stay away. Save yourself. And the rest of the communication's not mentioned. But he quite frankly said, it's okay. I know where we are. We can take care of it. At 5 o'clock, 1730 hours, 2 of the crewmen, and the voices aren't identifiable or aren't identified in the transcript of the Navy investigation, said if we would just fly west, we would get home. Taylor has 2 compasses on his plane, and at one time or another, one or the other or both of them is malfunctioning. These 2 say if we just fly west, we would get home. And 15 minutes later, the commander of the flight says, we are now flying 270 degrees, which means we're flying west. And figuring in the time they've been gone, the speed of the aircraft, the fuel that they have, they're about an hour off the east coast, the Atlantic coast of Florida. If they just keep flying in that direction, they may miss Fort Lauderdale, but they'll find Florida. Tragically, at 1806 hours, Taylor says, turn around and fly due east until we run out of gas. He has determined that they are out in the Gulf of Mexico. Somehow they have missed Florida. And he says if we turn around and fly back to Florida till we run out of gas, we'll be closer to the coast, easier to find. And all the ships, all the aircraft have lifeboats on them, survival gear, a flashlight, and so forth. We'll get closer to the coast and they'll be able to find us. The tragedy is he was already on the east coast of Florida and now is flying away from it. And one of the saddest things about this story is between 5:15 and 6:06, they finally locate where the flight is. It's about 5:30. That this high-frequency directional finder, otherwise known as a Huff Duff, locates where they are. And they're in that circle, about 100-mile diameter, well north of Fort Lauderdale, but close to Florida. The tragedy is the teletype that communicates with the base to get them the report, to get it to Taylor, is broken. And they don't get it repaired for more than an hour. By that time, the flight is literally and really lost. At 7:46, Miami begins to call. This is the radio transmission. Foxterra 28, Foxterra 28, this is NSO, NSO, NSO. How do you read? Over. And then it's 7:49, and then it's 7:54, and then it's 7:59, and the aircraft had enough fuel to last until 8 o'clock. Then at 8:37, the Coast Guard sent out a message. All ships in the area east of the Florida coast, be on the alert for 5 planes considered to be down. 14 airmen, 5 aircraft were down. Now here's where the legend picks up again with inaccuracies. You're looking at a Martin Mariner aircraft. One of these was launched at 6:30. This is representing the second one that was launched at 7:30. The legend says that only one Martin Mariner 9 was launched to rescue. It wasn't the first one, it was the second one. And the first one was sent to that map position. You remember the circle off of New Smyrna? And they were to go there and fly an expanding square pattern so that you can cover the largest possible territory. Then they're to go to a spot. They were given a spot to fly to and begin their search, and they were to get there at about 8:30. And before it gets there, a ship at sea sees an explosion in the sky along the flight path of Martin Mariner 9. So another plane has been lost. And that's true. Another plane was lost. Now, the SS Hines is a ship at sea in the area where the flight might have been. And the telegraph operator sees a light on the horizon flashing Morse code. I'm going to play you Morse code by ear because I can't flash it. And what he hears, or what he says he sees, he writes down and takes it to the captain, and it goes like this. And there's the down arrow a little bit. What he reports and gives to the captain is the word call. which makes absolutely no sense. The captain looks at it and he says, I need more than this. This doesn't make any sense at all. And this is what he recorded. The Morse code for C is dash dot dash. A is did-ah. Did-ah, did-it is L. Did-ah, did-it is L. It is possible that what he saw, and with the rolling of his ship and the rolling of a life raft out there on the sea, he miscommunicated as this. Or KFTVI, which does make sense. But look at the call for C, take the last dot off, and you get a K. Put it with the A and the first dot off of the L, and you get an F. Take the dash and you get a T, put those two dots over there with that, you get a V and you get an I. That's significant. Here it is again. Because KFTVI is an international code for emergency. K means stop your vessel immediately. Fox, tear, FT, that's the flight of the pilots. That's the way they would have identified themselves. V means I require assistance, and I doesn't have a meaning in this code, but perhaps he was starting to say, I am airman, and put his name to it, but that was the end of the code. The legend says that the Martin Mariner 49, I said 49, vanished within a few minutes after Flight 19 was last heard from. It was almost 2 hours before it disappeared. Martin Mariner 49 was the only rescue plane. It wasn't even the first rescue plane. Lieutenant Taylor had been physically or emotionally impaired. In the Navy testimony, in the record of the testimony, there are commendations and certifications of his leadership and abilities. The factors which prevented Flight 19 from being saved, I mentioned Taylor's compasses were not working at some time or another, the bad radio reception, a delay in sending out the rescue planes because of the failure of the teletype system, the approach of night, the invasion of bad weather, the inability to locate the flight promptly, the failure to broadcast as soon as they knew where they were. And this one, the military discipline that kept the group together, even though several of the pilots knew they were heading the wrong way. You remember those two who said, and they punctuated it with a colorful metaphor, if we just fly west. But military discipline, they stayed together. They stayed with their captain, their lieutenant. Now, it's January 28th, 1986. This is the launch of the shuttle Challenger that exploded, and exploration in the sea revealed an aircraft contemporary to our story. And eventually, parts of it were brought up. Part of the fuselage, part of the wings, and part of the engine cowling. They examined those two pieces and found on them the flight, the manufacturer's numbers, the identification numbers of those parts on that plane that belonged to Captain Bill Stivers, Foxterre 117, and they found it within distance between that circle and Fort Lauderdale and the launching point of the shuttle. They found part of the flight, Foxterre 117. The legend of the Bermuda Triangle, as illustrated by this book by Charles Berlitz. Berlitz made a lot of money on his language courses. He made more money on this book. The amazing thing about the legend of the Bermuda Triangle is that it never got started But it makes for interesting reading, it makes for interesting discussion, and it brought you out to share this 45 minutes with me. Flight 19 and the Legend of the Bermuda Triangle. Thank you.